So what do we do about that? We now, this HLA type is highly variable. And another thing I usually tell my patients, this is a big group of people, but unless they're brothers and sisters here in the room, it's very unlikely that any of us have the same HLA type. It's, 1 out of 1,000, so there's not 1,000 people in this room. One of the great advances and one of the great humanitarian efforts is that a lot of people around the world are willing to donate marrow for one another. And so this is the National Marrow Donor Program in the US. I live in the US. There's 7 million donors now in the US. People who have signed up, whose HLA type is known, who are willing to donate for one another and for totally unknown strangers at the other side of the world, literally. I guess I'm at the other side of the world from where I live. This is not just the US. There's another 7 million in sites around the world. Germany has a huge bank. For Asian countries, Japan has a huge bank. I'm sure there's a network here. England has it. So we have access. All these is a very well organized organization. So when we have a patient who we think might need a transplant, the first thing we will do is get his siblings typed. It's a blood test. Siblings match, then great. Then we have to make sure the sibling is healthy. Second thing, sibling doesn't match, we look in the registry. We have access to the HLA typing of all these donors. And many times we do find a donor thanks to this network that is available or patients that are worldwide available as donors. The number of, this is already an old slide, I should have updated this slide, but this is 4 million donors as of 2000. I have another slide somewhere else that shows how we are now up to 6 million donors, 7 million donors in the US. So it is quite amazing, and with 7 million donors, we find donors for many patients. Not only do we find donors for many patients, but we also, the technology, something that has happened in the background of all of this that patients are not always aware of, is that we know better how to identify these subtle differences in that HLA type. We can now very well pinpoint that donor out of that 7 million. There's 100 that look that they are similar. Yes, there are 100 that look that they are similar to our patient, but there's 5 that are exactly identical to that patient. 10 years ago, we were not able to do that. So 10 years ago, we picked these 100, we picked one at random, more or less, and sometimes we did well, and sometimes we didn't. Now we can really find a very good donor for many of these, a perfect donor. As a result, and this is actually kind of interesting, these are the survivals of patients transplanted for a particular disease with siblings. And this is 1988. And this is 2007, and you see it has improved a bit. It was 65%, it's gone up to 70%, it's slowly trending up, so we are doing better. But for these unrelated donors, we are doing much better. It's gone up from 40% to 55%, so it's almost, for practical purposes, it's almost the same. Patients that have now a good unrelated donor in 2007 to have practically the same outcome as patients who have a matched sibling donor, which is quite an advance as far as I'm concerned, and makes a huge difference for many patients. Leads to other questions. What about patients who don't have a donor there? That's another issue that is being addressed, but that is still difficult. So there's still patients who don't find a donor, even despite these huge databases or sample databases. Now, as a result of these improvements, among these allogeneic transplantations, it used to be that most of the time we did the allotransplants just with siblings, what is called related here, and only a small percentage underwent these unrelated donor transplants. As you see, in 2006, 2007, again, these are worldwide data, almost half are done with these unrelated donors, just because the procedure is better, the registries are larger. It still leaves a question. Let me, for patients who don't have a donor, I showed this yesterday. This is our minorities are always a problem. The largest minority in Chicago is African Americans, and for African Americans in our registry, for a variety of reasons, we find very, very few of these good unrelated donors. So another advance is cord blood transplant, where cord blood is now being collected from many, again, a voluntary effort most of the time. Mothers donate, mothers have a baby. The cord blood, this is the umbilical cord of a newborn, and the baby is somewhere here, I guess. The baby is just born, and the cord blood and the placenta is on the other side. This is full of blood. That blood contains blood-producing cells, stem cells, and that can recover, that can do the same function as a bone marrow transplant. So this used to be thrown away, and what they do here is they stick a needle in it and they fill this blood bag with it, and this gets stored. And the amazing thing about this is that this is typically about 20 ml. It's a little bit, it's like a syringe, and but it's extremely proliferative, and it does not require this close matching. So we are now increasingly doing transplants with these, and a number of centers around the world with these cord blood transplants. Let me skip this. So allotransplant. So you need a sibling donor or an unrelated donor or a cord blood donor. It's a curative procedure, and I'll talk about the complications. But the outcome is determined by how healthy the patient is, no longer by the patient age, by how good a donor the patient has, and by what disease we are dealing with and how advanced the disease is. Now, a couple of words about autologous transplant, a very, very different procedure. And this is a very old slide, but I like to show it. What happens with an autologous transplant, this is done for patients who have, again, a mostly hematologic disease, where we want to give very high doses of chemotherapy, hoping that high doses of chemotherapy will get control of a malignancy, myeloma, lymphoma, much better than regular doses would. This is a particular regimen. I'm not going to go into this. This chemotherapy would destroy their stem cells, would destroy the cancer, but would also destroy their ability to produce blood. So we collect their stem cells from the peripheral blood by giving them filgrastim, GCSF. The stem cells that usually reside in the marrow come into the bloodstream, get collected, get frozen down, then we give the heavy chemotherapy and give these stem cells back. In this old study, this is 10 years old, we did that for a particular indication 4 times. Most of the time we do it once or twice for some myeloma patients these days. We rarely, if ever, do it repeatedly anymore. But the concept is that we really protect their blood-producing cells from the side effects of chemotherapy by removing them, preserving them, freezing them down, and then giving them back. This is how we collect these cells. Some of you may have gone through that. This is an apheresis machine. We put a needle in each arm. The blood comes out. The stem cells are in the bloodstream. They are collected and they are returned to the patient.